So, quick disclaimer before we start is that anything that I say, if you think it's common sense, it could be for you, doesn't mean it's for everyone else. So, instead of downplaying anyone's experience, just move on to what you find useful. The other thing is that anything that I say, unless I explicitly generalize that idea, I don't operate on black and white thinking, meaning that ideas can evolve and be modified. So, in other words, take anything that I say with a grain of salt. When I was in high school, I was pretty lazy. I was getting C's and B's. The thing is, in my high school is that if you had C's, you would have to go to extra office hours to get your grade up. Otherwise, you would have to go to detention. If you had B's, you would get these annoying warnings saying like, hey, you're close to a C, bring your grade up, otherwise you might have to go to office hours. I hated these. So to avoid all of these warnings, I got straight A's, right? And it was only achievable because I wasn't as challenged as often as I am here at Stanford. Hence, I didn't learn how to study. Not knowing how to study, I came to Stanford and I was failing classes because I had a false confidence that I knew what the material was when I did it. So, learn from my mistake, learn how to study. So what I studied? I get told not to get political, but honestly, politics affect us every day, so deal with it. In middle school, I read this book called by Francisco de Damo. The premise of the book was basically that they could take away everything from you except your knowledge. And I know this firsthand because, again, starting again with $300 in a backpack, what do you think helped me move forward? Gaining knowledge. The other part is that ignorance is bliss, in that it's easy to generalize ideas and not challenge your thoughts, right? At the same time, it also allows for others to easily manipulate you in all aspects of life because you don't develop critical thinking skills. So honestly, knowledge is one of the, if not the most important thing in life, and that's why it's important to study. When to study? First, you gotta get a baseline of how much time you should be spending studying per class. Your school might already have a metric on this. Here at Stanford, 1 unit is 3 hours worth of work in a week. So 3 unit class, 9 hours. But don't just rely on that alone. Like, make sure that you're going online to reading the reviews and asking people who already have taken this course to try to determine how much time are people actually spending studying for this class. Once you have that, prioritize the harder and important subjects. And this could vary per person. For instance, me personally, I love numbers and I have great pattern recognition skills. Hence, it's easier for me to understand math concepts than other subjects, right? So I spend less time studying for math classes. Once you have that, you gotta distribute it evenly across the week. But before you do all that, make sure that you have other more important events already in your schedule. So like when you have class, lecture, meetings for clubs, and whatnot, right? Once you have that, assess at the end of the week whether it worked for you or not, and then adjust accordingly. So you could adjust it weekly or even daily, because like for instance, for me, sometimes things pop up in the middle of the day and I have to reallocate what I'm gonna be studying for a certain subject. So the other thing is study blocks. Honestly, me personally, it didn't work out. I was overwhelmed because again, things would pop up in the middle of the day, and if I didn't study at that designated time, I thought I was behind, but it was just all in my head. But if you do this, make sure that you're color coding each class. And apart from that, make sure that you're adding buffer time. So like when you have to go travel, when you have to go pick up medicine, you have to go take a nap, whatever it is, right? But all of this is that efficiency is really important. And I'm gonna touch more on that on the how to study section. I highly recommend not studying in your dorm. 2 reasons. One of them being that our brain associates different environments with different feelings. So your dorm, that's where you go to sleep, right? It might be harder for you to lock in there because your brain already thinks this is where we calm down, right? As opposed to a study spot where your brain is like, that's where we normally lock in. The other aspect is that there's so much to explore on campus. Like you could be meeting different people, finding new organizations, different events that are happening on campus, right? For first generation low-income students, I know it can be intimidating to go to places where we're the minority, but honestly, just go regardless. Because if we don't show up, then who will? You have to consider that representation is going to grow over time when people start feeling more comfortable when they see others like them there. You also have to consider that our representation, it's low, not because we don't belong, but because they killed our ancestors who were doctors, engineers, scientists, and more. And the other thing is that if you're coming in not knowing anyone, I highly recommend going to the community study nights. They tend to be tailored for us to have a welcoming and safe space. I didn't know what studying was. I thought it was just doing homework. I didn't know that it meant additional practice. If you don't know what to actually study for, I recommend looking at a couple of things. One of the first ones is the syllabus. When you look at a syllabus or a course schedule, it's usually broken down into different topics that you're going to be covering. Next, look at a textbook. At the end of the chapter, there's usually like summaries, practice problems, quizzes, whatever it may be. Then, look at your homework. Inside your homework, there's usually like key concepts or things that just keep getting repeated, right? These are the things that you're going to want to be looking out for. Last is go to office hours, ask your classmates, or ask someone that's already taking this course. So have your list of the different things that you're going to be studying, and then ask them like, hey, look, these are the things that I'm going to be studying for. Is there anything I'm overlooking? And they might be able to give you some insight on things you didn't even know about. With all of this, you have a comprehensive list of what to actually study for. So how to study? Honestly, this is one of the most important things to understand about studying in general, is that we have two modes of thinking, right? So I learned this in a book called A Mind for Numbers by Dr. Barbara Oakley. I'll put a link in the description. But anyways, this book basically explains that we have two modes of thinking, right? First one is focus. This is when you're actively engaging with whatever you have in front of you, you're paying attention to it, right? You're picking up the information. The next one is diffuse. Diffuse is when your brain is just doing background work. So that means that you're doing anything but engaging with that information. So you can go eat with a friend, go for a walk, whatever it may be, right? The thing is that you need both of those in order to study effectively, to pick up information to learn. Because studying 24/7 is not healthy. You need breaks in between. Because if not, you're not letting your brain rest. And honestly, you're just overloading it with information. So it's going to be harder for you to pick up this, whatever you're studying, right? And this is really important to optimize how you study. So next we have pre-lecture notes. I highly recommend doing this a couple of days beforehand, because if you do it the morning of, it's not going to be the best use of your time. So what I normally do is that I glance at the different topics that we're going to be going over, right? And then afterwards, I go on YouTube and I watch different videos explaining it as a concept, as a whole, or like different walkthroughs on how to solve these kind of problems. There's three benefits to this, honestly. The first one is that you increase the amount of time that you're exposed to this kind of content. You know, the whole practice makes perfect thing, it's an actual thing. Next is that you consolidate information, right? Again, going back to that whole diffuse mode kind of thinking, you're allowing your brain to do background work days before you're actually going to lecture. The last one is that you identify potential challenges. So for instance, I would do pre-lecture notes and then I would go to lecture and then I'm like, damn, like I still don't understand this topic. That was a signal for me to go to office hours, right? And get help on understanding this. And with all of this combined, honestly, it sets you up for success for learning the rest of the material later on. Next, you have top down and bottom up thinking, right? And what that means is that for top down is that you have a major idea and you break down that major idea into different levels. This is going to vary per subject on how many levels it's going to have, right? But let's go back to that major idea. You look at that major idea and you break it down into subsections. Once you have that second level, right, you have to go back to that main level and be like, hey, do I know how to synthesize these two levels? If you do, you move on to the next one, the one that specifies those subsections. And you're at the third level and you go back to the second level. Do you understand how those connect, right? And then go back to the first level and how did those three connect? You just keep going down until you're at the last level, right? And this is going to help you synthesize information in terms of how are they all interconnected. For bottom up, I usually do this when I'm really lost. So if I really don't understand a concept, I'm like, I don't know what this means in general, I can't make up an idea in my mind. That usually means is because we don't understand what that definition means. Like the little keywords, we probably don't understand those meanings as a whole, right? So what you do instead is that you look at those keywords and you're like, okay, what does this mean? What does this mean, right? You go up a level once you have those little ones. You go up a level and then you're like, okay, these are the small ideas and this is how it builds this other idea. Once you have those two, again, you go up another level and you just keep going until you understand the major concept as a whole, right? And again, all of this is different processes in terms of helping you synthesize information. So when you're learning all of these concepts, you're probably wondering like, how do I know if I actually understand it versus false confidence? One of the biggest things that I use is the analogy benchmark. So basically, if you're able to explain this complicated concept, right, as an analogy to someone who has never seen this kind of content before, it's very likely that you understand what you're doing. So one of my famous like analogies, right, is the hashing puppies. When I was learning about hashing computer science, I basically explained hashing through puppies in terms of like you're trying to fit these amount of puppies in bins, right? So let's pretend you have a bunch of different puppies and you give them an ID tag. For whatever reason, let's say there's the same ID tag, right? To help differentiate between puppies, you differentiate them by colors, right? So you want to place the least amount of puppies per bin so it's easy for you to find them and it's also so they wouldn't fight, right? And then that's basically how I was able to explain hashing. And people who have never taken computer science were able to understand that. So this last method, I highly recommend doing it until midterms or final season because a lot of it is what leads up to it. You gathering all this different information to be able to solve these kind of complex problems, right? And I call it the raw dog method. So you either have a blank paper or a whiteboard, right? And if you couldn't tell, I like whiteboards. I love my dry erase markers, right? Anyways, point is you have 4 different colors. You don't need all these colors, but honestly, I'm a visual learner, so I do it. Feel free to do whatever you want with this. 4 colors. The first one is the one where you write down what the problem is or formulas that you're going to need to solve this problem, right? The second one is the color that you're going to be using to do your work. The next one is the corrections, right? That you write down, look, this is the actual answer, and this is where like you messed up, like circling the different parts where you messed up. The last one is the like explaining everything. Like not just why you got the wrong answer wrong, but like why the right one is right and why if any other option was available, why are those also wrong or half right or whatever. You're basically explaining every single concept there is on there. And with all of this combined, honestly, it's hard. It's really hard, especially if you want to go like hard mode. Don't put any formulas. I know it's crazy. You don't have to. If you have time, do it, but you don't have to. But a lot of this is active recall. And that's one of the best methods to learn, honestly. Because if you start doing this beforehand, especially like this is how I do it, that if I want to go hardcore mode, right? Like no formulas, no references or anything, when it comes to the exam, it's easier because I'm like, I did this without the formulas. I did this without having all this different information, having this formula sheet or whatever. It's an add on. And it just sets you up for success, honestly, for learning, being able to learn this kind of material for finals or midterms. So I'm not really gonna go over what spaced repetition is as much. Like I'm not gonna go deep into it or the Pomodoro technique. I'll put videos in the description if you want to learn more about it, but I'm not gonna go super deep into this. But spaced repetition is just you spacing out when you're studying different topics, right? Like you don't do it back to back or like again 8 hours straight. That's not healthy. The other one is that you do like a timer, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off, right? Like you just keep alternating it. You can switch that up too. The one that I will go over is Parkinson's law. I love this law because it's so true. And I'm telling you because I used to procrastinate. Parkinson's law basically explains that whatever task you have, if you allocate a certain amount of time, that's how long it's going to take you to do it. So if you're like, I have 2 weeks to do this essay, I'm not going to start until later. You're not going to start until later because you're like, I have 2 weeks. Next thing you know, you're procrastinating, right? So what I do instead is that, again, once I have the different topics that I'm going to be going over, I'm like, you know what? For this topic, I'm going to spend 20 minutes on it. And if I go beyond it, that either means that I don't understand it or I need more time, right? If I need more time, like you'll kind of know because you're like, oh, I'm like 75% done with this problem. It's not that it's hard, it's just that I didn't do it fast enough or whatever, right? But if you're stuck with it,
that again is a signal that, hey, you need help, you need to go to office hours, whatever it may be, because for whatever reason you don't understand this concept, and that's okay. I don't really do group studies only because I'm a yapper. Like I love talking. So it's like if you put me in a group of people, it's gonna be crazy. So what I don't really do is that I go and study alone, right? But I do group study sometimes. That's usually when it's like final seasons or like we're about to finish a problem set, right? That I go over the homework and just make sure that like we all understand it, or if I have issues with something, I'm like, hey, I really don't understand how this works. They could give me a different perspective on it. So it's not that it's not useful, it's just understand when to use it, because it can either break it or make it, right? It can either have you procrastinating or it can actually help you find different perspectives and solving different problems. So this topic kind of gets me a little heated up, right? Resources. Use them. It's very likely that your campus has some kind of academic tutoring, coaches, whatever it may be, right? Additional help outside of the classroom, like office hours and whatnot. I highly, highly recommend using these because honestly, when I started off taking CS courses here, I was kind of lost. Like, don't get me wrong, the first 2 weeks, it was like super easy. Like, you just had to make this little thing move. And I was like, oh, it's fine. I got this. I didn't. The third week kicked in, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? So, after that, I started going to like weekly tutoring sessions, right? And shout out to him. If I didn't go to those tutoring sessions, I probably wouldn't have passed that class, right? But it's just to show that this additional help, there's no shame in it and asking for additional help. It's there for a reason. Like I feel like you're shooting yourself in the foot if you don't take advantage of it. So yeah, so ask for help. There's no shame in it. Like we've all been there. And use those campus resources. They're there for a reason. It's kind of silly not to use those free resources. The other thing is that to try out different methods, right? Like whatever method I said here is probably not going to work for you, and that's okay. There's other people who have different methods out there, right? Or it could be that you have a combination of both, or however many there are out there, right? The other thing is that remember to be flexible and adaptable with all of this. You have to reassess at the end of the week how your study habits, whatever it was, is working or not. Because each week, each day, like you might have something random come up, like you get sick or you get to go to a conference, or you have to work extra, whatever it is, right? You have to be able to adapt to those different situations. Next is that you have to be honest with yourself. This whole false confidence of like, oh, I know the material. You don't want to find out when you're sitting in the exam that you actually don't know the material. It's not going to be fun. Yeah. So don't do that. The last thing is that don't compare yourself to others. Like, I know it's easier said than done, but again, every time you catch yourself doing that, you got to remember that, again, all of these people that are trying to brag about, like, I didn't even study or whatnot, like, this is so easy. If you're really smart, right, and secure, you don't need to be telling everyone that you're smart. Like, okay, like there are some people at Stanford here who do that, right? That want to brag about being smart. But for the most part, it's like we already got here. Like we don't need to prove anything to anyone. There's a reason we're here. So same thing goes for you. It doesn't matter where you are. Like you got to the place where you are because of the work you've been doing. Otherwise you wouldn't be there. So don't compare yourself to what others are doing. And also for first generation low income students, like it's gonna be hard. A lot of the times you're gonna be like, I'm not fit for this or whatnot, like I'm not understanding these concepts. You have to understand that we're building from scratch. Like a lot of these concepts is gonna be the first time that we're exposed to it. That's why it's hard, because it's not that we can't do it, it's just that we never seen it before, right? It's gonna get easier along the way, so just stick with it. You're gonna be fine. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. Like, let me know which one stuck out to you or which one you're gonna apply this upcoming school year, right? And share this with a friend who needs it, because this upcoming school year, we're gonna lock in. But yeah, apart from that, like, if you like this kind of content, like and subscribe, because that lets me and the algorithm know that you guys like this, right? And yeah, apart from that, just thank you for watching. And we got this. We're gonna lock in.